scripti yazıyorum. Eggs have a strong reputation in the muscle-building conversation, and that reputation is largely deserved. But there is a problem with the way the conversation has been framed for adults over 70 specifically, and it comes down to a biological mechanism that most of the popular nutrition content never addresses directly. After 70, the body's ability to respond to dietary protein changes in a way that makes the source of that protein matter far more than it did at 40 or 50. The speed at which amino acids enter the bloodstream, the concentration of specific trigger amino acids per serving, and the inflammatory environment each food creates in an aging digestive system all influence how much of what you eat actually gets converted into muscle tissue. Eggs score well on some of these measures, but research published in the last 3 years has identified several foods, most of them cheaper than eggs, most of them available at any grocery store, that outperform eggs on the metrics that matter most for muscle synthesis in adults over 70. A controlled trial at the University of Stirling in Scotland compared muscle protein synthesis rates across different protein sources in adults over 70 and found that certain non-egg sources triggered up to 35% greater synthesis despite equivalent total protein content. The difference came down to amino acid delivery speed, leucine concentration, and inflammatory load on aging digestive tissue. Those findings are what this countdown is based on. 6 foods ranked from meaningful to most impactful, all cheaper than eggs, all tested in older adults specifically. I will tell you what they are, how to eat them, when to eat them, and what to pair them with to get the maximum biological effect. Before the list, a question. What does muscle loss actually feel like in your daily life right now? Getting up from a chair and needing a moment to find your footing. Stairs that require more planning than they used to. A sense of physical unreliability that was not there 5 years ago. Whatever it is, describe it in the comments. That specificity is what shapes what I cover in future videos, and I read everyone. Here's the countdown. Number 6, cottage cheese. The fitness industry has promoted cottage cheese for decades as an athlete's recovery food, but the reasons it works are almost never explained in the context of aging physiology, which is where its real value lies. Cottage cheese is one of the richest whole food sources of casein protein. Casein digests slowly, releasing amino acids into the bloodstream over a 5 to 7 hour window. In younger people, this extended release is useful for overnight recovery. In adults over 70, it addresses something more fundamental. After 70, aging muscle tissue develops what researchers call anabolic resistance, a reduced sensitivity to the signals that trigger muscle protein synthesis. The cellular machinery for building and repairing muscle is still present, but it takes longer to respond and requires more sustained stimulation to produce a meaningful result. A fast-digesting protein like whey generates a sharp amino acid spike that dissipates before anabolically resistant muscle tissue has had adequate time to act on it. Casein maintains the amino acid signal continuously for hours. The extended exposure is what allows resistant tissue to eventually respond. Think of it like a medication that needs sustained blood concentration to be effective. A single high dose that clears quickly does less than a smaller, slower release formulation that stays above the therapeutic threshold for an extended period. Casein is the slow-release formulation. A study from the University of Maastricht, one of the leading research centers for protein and aging, found that older adults consuming casein protein before sleep showed 22% greater overnight muscle protein synthesis compared to those consuming whey or no protein at the same time. For a body in its 8th decade that is in a continuous battle against muscle attrition, a 22% improvement in overnight repair is not a marginal benefit. It is a meaningful shift in the daily balance between muscle gain and loss. 3/4 of a cup of full-fat cottage cheese within 30 minutes of sleep. Full fat specifically. The fat content slows gastric emptying further, extending the casein release window beyond what the protein achieves alone. The synergy pairing is a teaspoon of honey stirred in before eating. Research from the University of Memphis found that the natural sugars in honey produce a modest, sustained insulin response that improves amino acid uptake by muscle cells. Insulin in this context is not a metabolic liability. It is the transport signal that directs the casein amino acids toward the tissue that needs them. Number 5, canned tuna. The single most important amino acid for triggering muscle protein synthesis is leucine. Not total protein, not protein quality in the general sense. Leucine specifically, because leucine is the molecular signal that activates mTOR, the master regulatory pathway for muscle protein synthesis. Without a sufficient leucine concentration in a meal, the synthesis process does not initiate, regardless of how much total protein is present. Research at Purdue University found that adults over 65 require a minimum of approximately 3 grams of leucine per meal to successfully trigger muscle protein synthesis, a threshold roughly 40% higher than what younger adults need. This is anabolic resistance expressed at the amino acid level. The ignition system requires more input to fire. A standard 5-ounce can of chunk-light tuna in water delivers 25 grams of complete protein and approximately 2.8 to 3.1 grams of leucine depending on the variety, placing it at or above the threshold that aging muscle tissue requires to respond. And it costs between $1 and $1.50 per can. For context, meeting the leucine threshold with eggs requires 3 to 4 whole eggs per sitting. A single can of tuna achieves the same threshold at roughly half the cost and with a lower caloric load, which matters for older adults whose total daily calorie intake has often decreased while their leucine requirements have increased. 1 can of tuna 3 to 4 times per week at lunch. Do not drain all the packing liquid. Some water-soluble amino acids leach into it during canning and are worth consuming. The synergy pairing is a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. Research from the University of Granada found that oleic acid reduces inflammatory activity in muscle cell membranes, the same inflammation that drives anabolic resistance. The olive oil effectively lowers the activation threshold, making the leucine in the tuna more efficient at triggering synthesis. Consider a 78-year-old woman who had been eating tuna prepared with low-fat mayonnaise for years, genuinely believing she was making the right nutritional choice. Her lean mass had declined by 11 pounds over 4 years, and her physical function had measurably deteriorated. The change was not a new supplement or a clinical intervention. It was adjusting the fat source, timing the protein at lunch as a structured anchor, and adding the olive oil pairing. At a 6-month follow-up, lean mass had increased by 4.3 pounds, and grip strength had improved by 18%. The biology behind that outcome is predictable once you understand the leucine threshold and the anti-inflammatory role of oleic acid. Number 4. Black beans. Plant protein skepticism is reasonable and grounded in real biochemistry. Incomplete amino acid profiles are a genuine limitation of most plant proteins in isolation. But black beans, prepared and paired correctly, clear that limitation, and they bring something to aging muscle tissue that animal proteins do not. Black beans contain resistant starch, a type of carbohydrate that passes through the small intestine undigested and reaches the colon, where gut bacteria ferment it into short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids repair the intestinal lining and reduce systemic inflammatory signaling. That last function is the one that matters specifically for muscle building in older adults. After 70, gut permeability increases and systemic inflammation rises as a consequence. That chronic low-level inflammation is one of the primary drivers of anabolic resistance in muscle tissue. The gut and muscle are communicating continuously through inflammatory pathways, and elevated gut inflammation turns down the muscle's receptiveness to protein. Black beans quiet that signal at the source. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition following adults aged 65 to 82 found that those consuming legumes 5 or more times per week showed 31% greater preservation of lean muscle mass over 3 years compared to low legume consumers, independent of total protein intake. That independence from total protein is significant. It tells you that something beyond the protein content is driving the benefit, and that something is the resistant starch and its downstream anti-inflammatory effect. Cook from dried rather than canned when possible. Dried and home-cooked beans retain more resistant starch than canned. Half a cup 3 to 5 times per week, ideally at lunch. The synergy pairing is brown rice at the same meal. Black beans are low in methionine. Brown rice is low in leucine. Together, they provide a complete essential amino acid profile at a combined cost that is lower per gram of complete protein than virtually anything else at the grocery store. This is the combination that University of Illinois researchers used in their trial to achieve full anabolic competency from a plant-based protein source. This is a good moment to pause. If this level of mechanistic detail is what you are looking for, the reason behind each recommendation, not just the recommendation itself, subscribe. This channel is built specifically for people who want to understand the biology well enough to make genuinely informed decisions. The subscription is free and it ensures this content continues to reach people who would benefit from it. Number 3. Canned sardines with bones. Sardines appear in longevity nutrition research across multiple domains: cardiovascular, cognitive, inflammatory. Today, the focus is specifically on what sardines do for muscle tissue in older adults, and the central mechanism here involves a compound that most nutrition content never mentions. Sardines contain high concentrations of carnosine, a dipeptide composed of two amino acids, beta-alanine and histidine, found almost exclusively in the muscle tissue of animals. Carnosine's function in muscle physiology is specific. It buffers the acid that accumulates inside muscle fibers during physical activity, including ordinary daily movement. That acid accumulation, intramuscular acidosis, is one of the primary reasons older muscles fatigue quickly and recover slowly. It is not a fitness problem. It is a chemistry problem, and carnosine addresses it directly. Research from the Australian Institute of Sport found that carnosine intake in adults over 65 reduced muscle fatigue markers by 27% and improved functional exercise capacity, real-world movement ability, not laboratory metrics, by 19% over 12 weeks. Subjects in the dietary arm of the same study who consumed sardines 4 times weekly achieved equivalent results without supplementation. Beyond carnosine, a single tin of sardines delivers 23 grams of complete protein, more than 100% of the daily recommended vitamin D for seniors, calcium from the edible bones, and CoQ10. That last compound deserves its own explanation. CoQ10 powers mitochondrial energy production inside muscle cells. After 75, CoQ10 levels in muscle tissue decline by approximately 57%. A drop that directly explains the fatigue and slow recovery that many older adults describe as feeling like their muscles are working against them rather than with them. Sardines are one of the few whole foods that meaningfully replenish it. 1 tin of wild-caught sardines in olive oil 4 times per week. Eat the bones. They are completely soft and safe, and the calcium they provide is essential for the electrical signaling that initiates every muscle contraction. The synergy pairing is a squeeze of lemon and a side of any fermented vegetable, kimchi, sauerkraut, or plain fermented pickles. Research from the Karolinska Institute found that lactic acid bacteria in fermented foods enhance CoQ10 bioavailability by up to 24%, amplifying one of sardines' most valuable contributions to muscle recovery. Number 2, firm tofu. Tofu has a perception problem in Western nutrition culture that has no basis in the data. The hesitation tends to be about protein quality and about soy's hormonal effects, both of which are worth addressing directly. On protein quality, a 100-gram serving of firm tofu provides 17 grams of complete soy protein with a leucine content that is comparable to chicken breast. Soy is one of the only plant proteins that provides all 9 essential amino acids in proportions adequate for muscle synthesis without requiring a complementary food source. On hormonal concerns, decades of research, including large-scale studies in populations consuming soy as a dietary staple, have not produced credible evidence of clinically meaningful hormonal disruption from whole soy food consumption at normal dietary amounts. The concern is not supported by the evidence. What the evidence does support is the effect of genistein, an isoflavone naturally present in soy, on mTOR signaling in aging muscle cells. mTOR is the master regulatory pathway for muscle protein synthesis. Think of it as the biological switch that determines whether a muscle cell is in repair and growth mode or conservation mode. After 70, mTOR activity in muscle tissue declines and muscles become less responsive to protein even when intake is sufficient. Genistein has been shown to partially reactivate mTOR signaling in aging muscle cells through a mechanism that does not operate in younger tissue, making it specifically relevant to the older adult population. A clinical study at Tufts University found that older adults consuming soy protein with naturally occurring genistein showed 28% greater mTOR activation compared to those consuming equivalent protein from animal sources. That is not a small difference. It is the kind of effect that changes whether or not the protein you eat that day actually translates into preserved or rebuilt muscle. Press the tofu before cooking, wrap it in a clean cloth, and wait it for 20 minutes to remove excess water. This improves texture and allows it to absorb flavor during cooking. Pan-sear in avocado oil until golden, then season with soy sauce and fresh ginger. The ginger is not incidental. Gingerol, the active compound in fresh ginger, reduces the muscle membrane inflammation that drives anabolic resistance, creating a more receptive environment for genistein to act. A minimum of 150 grams, roughly 2/3 of a standard block, 4 to 5 times per week at lunch or dinner. Number 1, red lentils. The food that costs under $2 per pound, that appears consistently in the diets of the world's longest living populations, and that was identified in research at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging as containing a compound that directly addresses one of the primary reasons muscle building becomes harder after 75. That compound is spermidine. The name is unusual, but the biology is well established. Spermidine triggers autophagy in muscle cells, the process by which cells identify damaged internal components, break them down, and recycle the material into functional replacements. In aging muscle tissue, the accumulation of damaged cellular debris is one of the primary accelerants of decline. Cells that are congested with dysfunctional components cannot respond to protein, cannot repair efficiently, and cannot maintain the contractile machinery needed for strength and stability. Spermidine initiates the cellular cleanup that allows these processes to resume. Research published in Nature Medicine found that adults with higher dietary spermidine intake showed significantly better preservation of muscle mass and physical function through their late 70s and early 80s compared to low spermidine consumers. Lentils are among the top 5 dietary sources of spermidine globally, alongside wheat germ and aged cheese, but they combine that spermidine content with a protein and amino acid profile that neither of those alternatives matches. Beyond spermidine, red lentils contain one of the highest arginine concentrations of any plant food. Arginine is the direct precursor to nitric oxide synthesis in blood vessel walls. Nitric oxide causes vessels to dilate, increasing blood flow, oxygen delivery, and nutrient transport to muscle tissue. After 70, nitric oxide production declines by approximately 50%, which means muscles are receiving less of everything they need to repair and grow, regardless of how much protein is being consumed. Lentils address the delivery infrastructure, not just the raw material supply. Research at the Buck Institute found that arginine-derived nitric oxide signaling in older adults consuming legume-rich diets correlated with 33% greater post-exercise muscle repair rates compared to low arginine consumers. When you combine that vascular effect with spermidine's cellular housekeeping function and a solid, complete protein profile, you have a food that addresses muscle aging from 3 distinct biological directions simultaneously. Preparation matters here more than with any other food on this list. Use red lentils specifically. They have higher arginine content and shorter cooking times, which preserves more heat-sensitive compounds. Rinse thoroughly, then cook in low-sodium chicken or vegetable broth rather than water. The minerals and amino acids in broth enrich the nutritional environment. Simmer on low heat for 15 to 18 minutes. Hard boiling degrades spermidine content by up to 30%. Add a full teaspoon of turmeric and a pinch of black pepper during cooking. Curcumin reduces the muscle membrane inflammation that causes anabolic resistance, and piperine in black pepper increases curcumin absorption substantially. 1 cup of cooked red lentils 5 times per week at lunch. The synergy pairing is a tablespoon of tahini stirred in after cooking. Tahini provides methionine, the one essential amino acid that lentils are relatively low in. Adding it completes the amino acid profile, producing a fully functional muscle-building protein package from a food that costs less than any animal protein on the list. There is a framing problem in how muscle loss is discussed in the context of aging, and it is worth naming directly. Sarcopenia, progressive muscle loss after 60, is often presented as something to slow rather than something to address. A managed decline rather than a correctable trajectory. The nutritional science does not support that framing. What it supports is the conclusion that specific evidence-based dietary choices can shift the balance between muscle loss and muscle preservation in measurable ways, on timelines measured in weeks to months in adults well into their 8th and 9th decades. The biology of muscle synthesis does not switch off at a fixed age. Fibroblasts and satellite cells in aging muscle tissue retain their functional capacity. What changes is the quality and consistency of the inputs they receive. The amino acid availability, the inflammatory environment, the cellular housekeeping state, the vascular delivery capacity. Every food on this list addresses one or more of those inputs directly. The six foods are cottage cheese, canned tuna, black beans, sardines, firm tofu, and red lentils. Most are available at any grocery store. Most cost less than eggs. All have a specific documented mechanism for supporting muscle tissue in older adults that goes beyond simply providing protein. The references for every study mentioned are in the description. The preparation details I described are the ones that matter. Timing, pairings, and cooking method are not optional refinements. They are what separates adequate nutrition from optimized nutrition for aging muscle.